In this video, I play 2-5 cash at the win in Las Vegas, Nevada against a whale that is literally raising, calling, and going all in for thousands without looking at their cards. In the first hand of the session, I have ace-3 of spades and the hijack opens to $15. The cutoff calls and we make the call on the button. I could certainly squeeze here, but the small blind and big blind aren't super strong players, so I really don't mind having them in the hand. The small blind makes a call and the big blind is the Maniac, who ends up actually 3-betting to $100 blind. The original opener in the hijack folds and the cutoff calls. Now this is a really weird spot because my hand is certainly far ahead of a blind 3-bet range. I could back raise here and pick up a lot of dead money, but who knows, maybe the big blind still calls it off and we have to gamble for a lot. For this reason, I decide to just make the call. The small blind also calls. The flop comes king 8-6, 1 spade. Action ends up checking around to me and I'm just going to check this one back. The turn is the 5 of spades. This time action checks around once again to me. Now with the nut flush draw, I'm going to start bluffing as no one has shown any interest for 2 streets. I bet 225 into about 415. This time the small blind and big blind both make the call and the cutoff folds. The river is the 8 of clubs. Action once again checks to me and I have a decision to bluff or not to bluff. Normally bluffing a missed flush draw is not a great thing to do, but we are multi-way so it will look a lot stronger and I can certainly have an 8 here that I would have checked back on the flop. I decide there was enough disinterest on the flop and turn from my opponents and I have to bluff here. I go all in for about $1,200, which is an overbet into almost $1,100. The small blind is an older lady who does get very sticky and who likes to make light calls. I am very worried at this point as she goes deep in the tank, but eventually folds, and so does the big blind. We start this session off with a huge successful bluff. Just for some context before this next hand starts, I had just played in a very similar spot with the Maniac whale who is blind raising, where I raised to $30 in early position and they 3-bet me for $175. I ended up 4-bet jamming all in for about $1,200 and they folded. I was not able to record this, but they did see my cards and now we have this situation where the $10 button straddle is on once again and I raised to $35 on the hijack. The button is the Maniac whale who this time once again 3-bets me to $200 blind. With the straddle on, we are only about 80 big blinds effective and my hand is doing very well against a blind raise, so I go all in. The Maniac makes a call and let's see the run out. The flop comes ace queen 5. That's maybe good for me. The turn is a jack and the river is a 9. I feel okay about having middle pair here, but not really sure what to expect as I show and my opponent shows 7-4 of clubs. If there was ever any doubt that my opponent was doing this blind, I think this confirms it. Thankfully I hold, but this will not be the end of these hands with this Maniac. In the next hand, I actually have a premium pocket queens and the under the gun 1 player raises to $20. We 3-bet to $70 under the gun 2. The loose older woman cold calls in middle position, the whale cold calls, and the under the gun 1 original raiser makes a call. Of course, the flop comes ace high as we see something like ace 10-6. Everyone starts off by checking to the whale who ends up betting $95. The under the gun 1 player folds and for this price I'm not going anywhere, I make the call. And so does the middle position player. The turn is something like the 9 of spades, not too relevant, and action checks through. The river is something again not too relevant, let's say the deuce of diamonds. With almost $500 in the pot, I make a block sizing bet of $100. The middle position player calls and the whale ends up folding. They turn over ace queen off for top pair. We will lose this one. In the next hand, the low jack raises to $15. I have king 10 off in the cutoff. The Maniac whale in this hand is in the big blind, and the low jack opener in this hand is a reg, so I can certainly see them targeting the whale. For this reason, I decide to widen my range and put in the light 3-bet. I mean to make it 50, but I accidentally misclick and make it 30. For the min 3-bet, which accomplishes absolutely nothing. The small blind and the low jack make the call. Somehow, the whale is not in this hand. The flop comes king 5. We flop trips, but our kicker is not too strong. This is, however, not going to prevent us from betting as action checks to us, and I make it $30. The small blind calls and the low jack min raises to $60. Now when I said this guy was a reg, I did not say he was a good reg. I really don't know what the hell he's doing min raising here. This is just like button clicking, but whatever. I make the call and the small blind also calls. The turn comes the jack of diamonds. This time with $300 in the pot, the low jack bets $50. While my hand is not too strong multi-way and we do have to be careful, I'd say it is a bit under-repped and my opponent betting this small on this turn is pretty weak. For this reason, I decide to raise to 250. The small blind folds and the low jack makes a call. The river comes the queen of diamonds. My opponent checks and not really sure what I can get value from here if I bet. I really don't want to get re-raised if I bet, so I end up checking back. My opponent shows queen jack off for a turned pair. This was a weird hand and I'm glad I found the raise on the turn. In the next two hands, I am not involved, but they are too funny not to show. In the first one, the loose older lady ends up going all in for about $1,000 in a $200 pot versus the Maniac whale, who ends up making the call with just bottom pair and holding, causing the poor lady to reveal this. In the second hand, there is a flush draw on board and another player gets it all in with the Maniac whale for about $650 on the flop.
God damn it, how do I miss that? Look at this fucking hand. What?
The whale is upset and shows ace 6 of spades for a missed straight and flush draw.
Hey, how you doing?
No way.
He bit me. He bit me. No. He bit me. No. I can't even I have a trade on. I bet not to him. I love to him.
The other player in this hand shows 9-6 of hearts for a gut shot without even a backdoor draw. This just goes to show when there is a maniac blind raising at the table, it can also cause other players to do pretty insane things themselves. In the next hand, an early position player raises to $25. We call on the cutoff with ace jack off, and the button goes all in for $184. This is the same older lady who you just heard say she was on tilt. The small blind, who is the Maniac whale, ends up cold calling and the early position player calls as well. Now with about $600 in the pot, I have another interesting decision similar to the one earlier, where I could just call here or I could back raise. If we really think about it, the button is on tilt and could have anything. The small blind is playing blind and has anything, and the early position player probably doesn't have such a strong hand when they just call pre. If they had something like ace queen or ace king, they would certainly be re-raising pre. I really do like back raising here for a large amount, maybe something like $1,000 or all in. Folding, of course, is an option as well, but at the time I ended up calling. It's not too difficult to manage post-flop play with these players, but the problem is ace jack just doesn't really play well post in general. Nonetheless, the flop comes 6-3-3, 2 spades. Action checks to me, and with the ace of spades, I'm happy to check back and see a turn. The turn is a great card, the jack of spades. Once again, action checks around to me, and it's time to put in a bet for value. I bet small, 325 into about 740. The big blind Maniac folds, and the early position player thinks about it for a while, but eventually makes a fold. I probably could have gone even smaller here. The river is overkill as it comes to jack of diamonds. I flip over my hand and I'm up against queen 3 of clubs. So as I said, the button went all in pre with a pretty terrible hand. They actually ended up flopping trips, but we rivered them. Some call it a suck out, I call it justice. In the next hand, I have ace jack off in the small blind and the hijack raises to $25. The cutoff calls and we 3-bet to 150. This would ordinarily just be a fold, but this is not an ordinary game. The hijack is raising way too light and the whale Maniac is in the big blind, who, funny enough, ends up cold calling our raise, causing the hijack and the cutoff to call. The flop comes king 10-9. With 4 people total and $600 now in the pot, this is another weird spot. This board really hits my range. I can have pocket 9s, pocket 10s, pocket kings, queen jack. There are also lots of good turn cards, so I decide to bet small, 135. This causes the big blind whale to make the call, which we definitely don't mind, and everyone else to fold, which we really like. The turn comes the 9 of spades. This is not a good card for me as my opponent can definitely have a 9, so I check and he checks back. The river comes the jack of diamonds. We now have a pair, but now any queen makes a straight. I check once again and thankfully we do not face a bet and my opponent checks back.
God damn, I had you. Fucking I had you.
You had me?
Yeah, at a 10.
Oh shit. In the next hand, there is an under the gun shadow on for $10. We raise to $30 on the low jack with an unknown hand, and the whale ends up calling on the hijack. The The under the gun straddle ends up 3-betting big to 275. My hand is unknown in this one because I folded pre. The whale, however, ends up calling, which is important because he now has an over $4,000 stack, managing to get lucky versus many victims, which were not us, thankfully. The flop comes 9-9 deuce, 2 diamonds. The under the gun player bets $200 and the whale raises to $450. The under the gun player makes a call and the turn is the queen of spades. With almost $1,500 already in this pot, the under the gun player checks and the whale bets $400. Now the under the gun player min raises to $800. It's back to the whale, who eventually goes all in for about $3,500 total. The under the gun player snap calls and the river is the 10 of clubs. The hijack will end up showing pocket queens for a turned boat and the whale shows 9-4 off. I think it's safe to say the whale called blind pre in this hand again. They did flop trips and probably would have doubled up if the queen didn't come on the turn. This was an especially funny hand because on the turn, the whale was talking a lot and actually said this.
Need a 4. 4 is key.
He wasn't lying, but turns out that would not have helped him anyways. As expected, the whale was left with crumbs after this hand and was unfortunately the last we will see of him. With the whale now gone, I end up leaving and coming back later in the night and picking up pocket sixes. I raise under the gun 1 to $15, the hijack 3-bets to $60, and the small blind cold calls. I make the call and see if we can hit a set, which we do as the flop comes 10-7-6. The small blind checks, I check, and the hijack unfortunately checks back. The turn comes the ace of clubs. The small blind checks again, and being that this is a great card for the 3-betters range, I decide to check again. This pays off greatly as the hijack bets $75, and the small blind raises to $200. Nothing to do here but go all in for what I have remaining, which is about $500. If the small blind has a straight, congratulations, but otherwise our plan has worked perfectly. The hijack folds and the small blind makes a call. The river is the 5 of hearts. I show my set for the win and my opponent casually flips over King X of clubs for a turned flush draw that fortunately for us did not hit. In the next hand I have King Queen of hearts and there is a $10 button straddle. An early position player raises to $40 and we 3-bet to $120 in the low jack. My opponent makes a call and the flop comes Queen 9-8. My opponent checks and I bet small, $70. I think I probably should have gone bigger here, at least half pot. My opponent makes a call and the turn is a brick, let's say the deuce of hearts. Once again they check and this time I bet big, 225 into about 380. This gets the job done as my opponent makes a fold and we win. In the next hand I have King Queen of spades once again. This time the hijack raises to $20 and I 3-bet on the button to $60. The flop comes 6-5 deuce with 2 diamonds. My opponent checks and I put in a C-bet of $50. They make the call and the turn comes the queen of clubs. They check and now with 2 flush draws on board and us unblocking both of the flush draws, we are going to put in a big bet of $250, which is an overbet. They once again make the call and the river comes the 3 of hearts. Now with about $720 in the pot, my opponent checks. I could go for value here, but it feels a bit thin. If I had ace queen, I would certainly be going for value. I have to worry about them having ace queen here, considering having a worse queen than mine would be pretty rare. I check back and this is one of those rare circumstances where my opponent has queen 10, but not even suited, queen 10 off. This is really not a hand they should be calling my 3-bet pre with, and they should certainly be folding the flop. While I could have gotten value from this hand, I really don't hate the check back. I think it's pretty close between going for value and not. In the next hand, we are only 5-handed and I have ace 8 of hearts. I raise to $15 on the button and the big blind 3-bets to $70. I make the call and the flop comes 8-7-4. With $140 in the pot, my opponent checks. And with top here, it's certainly a spot I could bet, but I also think it's a spot I'm going to get check raised quite often and get put in some pretty difficult spots. I don't mind staying balanced and just checking back here and seeing what happens on the turn. I check back and the turn comes the ace of spades. We now have top 2 and my opponent now starts to bet. He bets $60 into about 140. If I were to raise here, it would just look too strong. I just make the call. The river is the 9 of clubs and there is almost $300 in the pot. This time my opponent bets $380. This is a huge overbet, about 1.5 times the pot. I could certainly be beat here by Jack 10, but that's about it. I make this pretty easy call with top 2 pair and my opponent shows a bluff, Queen 10 of diamonds. This is one of those hands that could have certainly check raised the flop. Obviously, if we knew the ace was coming, we wouldn't have cared, but if the ace does not come, we get put in some pretty interesting spots on the turn. Not sure how I feel about my opponent's play. The flop is also a good one for him to just barrel, and I really don't know if he needs to go so big on the river to get me to fold. I'm never folding an ace, and if I have a draw, I'll fold to a smaller size. I guess the sizing is more impactful when I have something like a middling pair. In the next hand, I have pocket 10s and raise under the gun to $15. The end of the gun 2 and big blind make the call. The flop comes Jack 6-3, 2 spades. This is a pretty good flop for me, so I go ahead and bet $30 into about 45. When we raise under the gun and one of the early position players makes a call, we should typically just be checking to them on the flop, as their range should be really strong. This was, however, the same opponent that called my 3-bet earlier with Queen 10 off, so I decided to just play a little bit more straight up and bet, which I will come to regret. The big blind folds and the turn is the Queen of Hearts. This time I check and my opponent bets 105 or pot. This is a big bet, but I don't quite believe him. I make the call. The river is the King of Spades. I check again, and this time my opponent bets $200. Kind of an interesting spot, as I do have the 10 of spades and I block the straights. So on one hand, it could make for a good hand to hero call with or even bluff with. But on the other hand, I think we want my opponent to have a 10, which would give them more bluffs. Despite not totally believing, we were multi-way in this hand, so I just end up making the fold. In the last hand of the night, we are still short-handed and I have ace 5 off. I raise to $15 on the hijack, the button and the big blind make the call. The flop comes 9-4 deuce. In this spot, we can sometimes check to the button, but I thought there was a lot of good turns that we get to barrel on, and we do have a gut shot, so I decide to bet $30. The button raises to $90, and the big blind cold calls. This is definitely weird, but I'm not folding when I have a gut shot to the nuts, or practically the nuts, which is the wheel. I make the call, and our prayers are answered as the turn comes the 3 of spades. The big blind checks and actions on me. I could certainly check here, but I really don't want this to get checked back. It's pretty unlikely the button has a set. I was thinking they most likely had a middling pair, so this is often just going to get checked back if I check here. For this reason, I decide to take an unorthodox line and lead for 195 into about 315. Somehow, both of my opponents end up folding. We get no extra value, as it appears they were just clicking buttons. We will end this session with a wheel, similar to how we ended another recent video, and we will cash out. Alright guys, we bought in for $1,500, cashed out for $4,700. That's an over 3K profit. You saw that whale. That guy was insane. It was a very good game. He said he's coming back later, so I think we're gonna come back later and hope to find him. But if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you thought, and thanks for watching. Peace!
I want to.